Thank you guys for being here. I know the Chris Keithley talk should be one that's very nice as well. So my talk's titled From Noob to Contributing Noob, as Francesco said. I'm going to try and give you a brief overview of like my contributions to the Elixir community and hopefully make some of you also give back a little bit if you're not doing so already. So let's start with a bit of who I am. I'm Daniel Serrano. I'm a software engineer in the biometrics team at Onfido, and we do online identity verification. I've been using Elixir, as Francesco said, for around 2 years now, and you can find me on social media, Twitter, GitHub, and whatnot, using this handle, DNL Serrano. So the outline for today's talk is this one. I'll talk about my initial days with Elixir, how I got into the language and how I got to know it. I'll then move on to my open source contributions for some of the libraries that we use at Onfido. I'll speak about my contribution to httpoison, to spandex. I'll talk about the library I created called Tomato, and then also a small contribution to elixir-thrift. I'll then take a step back and talk about other ways of giving back to the community, other than just opening pull requests and doing code changes to some library, open source library. And then I'll just end with some brief notes about what I think makes the Elixir community great and what makes us be all here and excited about this language. So a little bit about my early days with Elixir. I've been a Ruby developer for more or less 6 years now. And I started in Ruby, like I guess a lot of you, because Elixir has this sort of heritage from Ruby. And at my previous company, there were these two senior engineers that kept talking about this new exciting language that was being built and designed on top of the Erlang VM. And the Erlang VM was built to sort of power scalable, distributed, and fault-tolerant systems. It was a decades-old virtual machine that had been battle-tested, and it was powering real-life situations, telecom scenarios. Ericsson was behind it, and it was essentially a system that couldn't fail. And funny enough, the guy who was creating this new language was well-known in the Ruby community, Joseph Alim. You might have seen him around. He was the device creator, an authentication library for Ruby, and he was a Rails core contributor. When I was in between jobs, I heard about this company called Onfido, and I heard once again from my now director of engineering for Lisbon, Paulo, who is sitting in the back, about Elixir and how it could power the work that Onfido was doing and how it was so much better than what we had at the time, or at least it made a lot of the things that we were trying to do much easier. Mostly in terms of like scaling systems and making parallel calls and distributing the workloads. And so I eventually joined, and what I saw was that we were actually in-house already using Elixir to power a very hackish pipeline of Python executables, but it was being used to do something useful. We were using that fault tolerance to actually do something that proved to be useful for our customers. I had my first pull request using the language in a hackathon, so yay for hackathons. They're great for your engineers to sort of experiment with new, exciting languages or tools that you might not be aware of or would otherwise not use if it weren't for that sort of time frame where you can experiment with new stuff. And this was in a project that was already in production and working, but as part of the hackathon, I just had to do this little thing, and it ended up being sort of the start to then the work that I ended up doing in this bigger project. There was a lot of in-house knowledge building up as well. So at the time that I started learning Elixir, other colleagues of mine either already knew it or were starting to learn as well. I have two of my colleagues here in the front row that have co-written a book about Elixir. Paulo had written one already, and my team lead, João, has done 2 series of webcasts. So a lot of knowledge was building up. But I'm here today to talk about my experience and the tools that I used while I was working in the biometrics team. And in the biometrics team, we do, as Francesco was saying earlier when he introduced me, we do identity verification. And think about, like, you take a selfie or record a video, and you then take a photo of a document of yours, and we say if you are who you say you are, and if that document photo or document video pair is legitimate, if you're not trying to fool us. We do this in an automated way, and for that's powered by Elixir. You can think of this project for the biometric part of our offering as a microservices aggregator. We will go and call a bunch of other microservices, either be it written in Elixir themselves or Python for a lot of the research part, or even Ruby or Java. And we aggregate that result in this microservice. For this project, we used plenty of open source libraries out there, and some examples are here, like Poolboy for worker pools. We also used Fuse for circuit breaking. You have obviously XUnit and MOX for testing, also Statix for metric collection, or XStatsD previously, httpoison for HTTP call handling, and spandex for distributed tracing. One of those microservices was a Python one that actually returned a multipart response. And this is what led me to my first open source contribution. For those of you who are not familiar with it, multipart is just a way for you to pack different MIME types inside one HTTP response payload. You can do, maybe return some JSON and some PNGs to go with it, and even some audio. You can shove it all in there, and you just have to follow a standard to separate the various contents. So as you can see there, and as is defined in RFC 1341, there's a standard for this. You have boundaries that are defined at the header that is returned to you, and then the content is split according to that boundary. You can see here in this example that we actually handed that service an image, and it returned crops of that image with some meta information for each. So you can think of this response as various pairs. So the first pair is a metadata, a JSON metadata, and then you have a PNG. Then you have another pair, which is the second crop, the second metadata, and the second image, the second crop. So this is fine and all, but as a developer, you don't want to be doing things by hand. When you use HTTP, you're not building payloads by hand. You're not parsing responses by hand. You don't care about all these CRLFs, carriage return line feeds, and dash delimiters and boundaries and whatnot. You know that you use a well-defined standard, and it's there for you to just plug and play, sort of, kind of thing. But this wasn't happening with httpoison. So when you called it, and here you can see a mock response from a mock server that I created responding multipart, it will actually cobble up all of the response in one single payload for the body. And that's not ideal, right? Because you know you're using the well-known multipart construct and standards. So you want to have the logical parts. Here, I was expecting httpoison to actually divide up the various elements for me. And so that's what we end up kind of concluding from the previous screenshot. httpoison did not support multipart response parsing out of the box, but it depended on Hackney. So I started investigating. And Hackney, as some of you may know, is a well-known simple HTTP client library in Erlang. It provides a bunch of HTTP standards, and it's very well written, and it's what httpoison sits on top of. I started looking into the source code, playing smart, but couldn't find much. And then in the README, it was actually there. So Hackney multipart. It said it was a module to encode and decode multipart in HTTP. So I started digging more and more into that. And I ended up with decode form 2. Decode form 2, you can see here, is a function that receives both a boundary and the response body of an HTTP payload, ideally a multipart one so it doesn't fail. And it will split your response in those logical parts according to the boundary that you just passed it. And so here I'm thinking I'm onto something. And Turns out, lucky me, you can call it and it does exactly what you'd expect. So it returns a tuple with your usual OK for the status, it went fine, and then in the second element, you have the list of logical parts for your multipart response. So I wrapped it all up, nice and dandy, and I opened a pull request. I asked the maintainer if they actually wanted to keep the library light, because I'd seen some decisions in previous pull requests, but this seemed like a nice addition, at least from my point of view, using this daily. So I just sort of thought of asking, is this useful? And the end result looked more or less like this. So before you had to go through the header and extract the boundary from the multipart mixed, and then sort of break the abstraction of Hackney being there and actually go down into an Erlang module and call Hackney multipart. But with the handler that I created, you could just decode the body and pass it all the response, and it would take care of all of that corrupt for you. It was well received by Eduardo Gurgel, the maintainer of the library, and while this is great for you, like you feel a sort of sense of accomplishment of giving back, and I recommend everyone here doing it, there are also a couple of things that I think made it easier for this to get merged and to be accepted. So the first thing is something that we follow at Onfido a lot religiously, or almost. It's about commit messages and the way that we structure them. This is very inspired by Tim Pope, and I think that in the commit message that I wrote, I structured why it was there, and I also added some traceability, which we're big fans of. So if somebody just git blames it, they can see why this change was added and how we came to that decision by following the GitHub issue or even the GitHub pull request to see some further discussion. Also, as big sort of fans of documentation and leaving documentation as part of the code in the Elixir community, I tried to be careful with exdocs and add as much information as I could to what I was writing. It's great for you to be able to, even when you're in a plane, offline, to keep being able to search what the module does. You can just type H, name of the module, you get all of its functionality. And I tried to do that for the code that I was proposing. Also, a note for the README file. When I went to httpoison and I was looking for the support that multipart had, the support that httpoison had for multipart, I ended up being a bit confused because it did support a multipart request uploads, but it didn't support the response part of parsing the various logical parts. So I sort of gave it some love and was a bit more explicit in what it supports and how you can use it. So that was it. A first contribution, httpoison, done. For my second contribution, I looked into spandex, this library that we were using in Modus to do distributed tracing. For those of you who may not be familiar with it, it's just a really clever way of, by means of just injecting some headers in your HTTP payloads, you can trace the full lifetime of a single request through your complex mesh of microservices. So you can potentially identify bottlenecks in your application and see problems with a given request. Just debugging something gets really easy if you have this sort of tools. So we were using spandex again, and it was very easy to use spandex. The authors had done this amazing decorate function that you could just annotate the function that you want to have as part of the trace that you're doing, and it's really easy, right? As a developer, we usually call this aspect-oriented programming, right? Like you don't want your code to be filled with something that's not related to your business logic. You care about this, but you don't want your code to be polluted. So you can just annotate it. You can pass in the service name, the type, and a bunch of other options. You can even specify a particular span name. But with this, with spandex and me using it in Modus, some upgrade news came along. And it seemed fairly simple because the thing was we needed now in 2.0 to add a new dependency and to change some names of the modules. And at the time, it made a lot of sense because they were essentially making the the library more modular. So now you had like a spandex core, and you could have a backend for Datadog to see things in Datadog, but you could potentially extend it to have other backends. You had to change some module names and whatnot, but that was about it. The thing is, when we did this upgrade, we were upgrading to 2.4.0. And in between the version we were at and the version that we were upgrading to, this happened. So they had removed function decorators. And what this essentially meant was that we were going to have to implement them ourselves in our project. You can see in the commit message, Zach Daniel, the maintainer of spandex, writing about some compilation issues that some users of the library had reported previously. So we literally went back into spandex's Git history. We grabbed the module that did all the function decorating, and we literally pasted it into our project and started using it with a few tweaks here and there. But that was about it. So we had re-implemented this in our own project, but we thought we aren't feeling all of these issues that people talked about. So I just thought of asking. And the best place to ask is just go on the Elixir Lang Slack channel. And they have actually a room for the spandex project, and I just thought of asking, how would you guys feel about bringing back function decorators? Because we're not feeling all of these issues that were explained. And both Zach and Greg, a more recent contributor to the library, were very welcoming of bringing them back. They thought we could probably just have it in a less prescriptive way and more controlled. So whoever wanted to use them, they could use them. Whoever didn't want to use them, shouldn't be sort of affected by having this possibility in place in the library. And so with a few design decisions, I brought back function decorators. Again, wrapped it all up in a pull request, and it was a very insightful experience because you get a ton of comments. It's a bit daunting when you look at it about being 100+ comments, but it was really interesting discussions, a lot of insightful suggestions, and you end up with a better state of your code and the contribution that you're making. Also, shout outs to Zach and Greg, because they were amazing in the discussions and the design decisions, like about what we were doing here, bringing back the function decorators in a way that minimizes hassle for whoever is already using the library and was reporting the issues back then. This again is great. You get really cool messages from the maintainers, like saying that it's very cool that you're contributing and whatnot. You get recognition for your work, which is always nice. It gives you a sort of sense of accomplishment. You use all of these libraries each day, and it's also good to give back to the community a little bit. And I feel like it's only when you do it that you really feel that sense of accomplishment. It fosters deeper and broader knowledge, right? Because this was a feature that touched a lot of places throughout the whole library, and you end up just being curious and wanting to know, how is this done, and how is this being used, and how do they keep track of this information? And you end up going and going through the files, and all of a sudden you know pretty much the library one into the other. Ultimately, it strengthens the community. You aren't doing this just for yourself. You're not doing this just for your employer. You're doing this for everyone to be able to use it. If it was useful for you, maybe there's someone out there that can actually also benefit from it. And with giving back, you're doing just that, strengthening the community. And that's a bit of the message that I want to pass here. So that was that. Spandex contribution done. For my third contribution, code contribution, if you can call it that, I wrote a library called Tomato. And Tomato was the first project that I wrote in Elixir on my sort of spare time, personal investment, to get to know the language a bit more. And it ended up being sort of stopped for a while. But I think it's a great exercise. Tomato is a thin wrapper around the Zomato API. For those of you who don't know what Zomato is, it's just you can describe it as a sort of a Yelp. So it's a restaurant aggregator. And they have an API which you can query restaurants by ID, location, and whatnot. And I think this is a great way to get the feel of the language. You at least on my experience, I'm a backend developer. I do a lot of microservices calls and response parsing and data handling, and getting to know what structs look like in the language and getting to know what tools are being used for HTTP calls and whatnot. I think this is a great excuse to get on and get your hands dirty with that sort of stuff that you end up using in your day-to-day job. As I said, the API is pretty simple. It's pretty heavily X-docked, and you can query restaurant again by ID, geolocation, establishment type, cuisine, what have you. And while doing this, I actually ended up taking care of it a little bit and publishing it as an open source library. This allowed me to get a deeper understanding of what Hags looks like and some more advanced options in Mix. And also, it just gives you that sense of understanding the tools that you have at your disposal. If I hadn't open sourced it, I probably wouldn't know how to even publish a library to eggs, and this was an excuse to have to learn that. So tomato contribution done. For my last code contribution, if you can call it that, this one was really small. I was looking into Jaeger. So Jaeger is Uber's distributed tracing platform. Since we were using spandex, and as I said before, with Datadog as the backend, and because the library was now more modular, I thought I could maybe just use Jaeger as a second backend. Instead of using Datadog, I could use Jaeger. This was mainly because of a feature that Jaeger has and that I really wanted to try, which is diffs for distributed traces. So you can see differences in two requests. And this is really awesome because you can identify like much more clearly the bottlenecks and the differences in two users' requests, even if they apparently look the same initially. It uses thrift as the underlying communication protocol. And this posed not a problem, but a new challenge. I was going to have to use elixir-thrift, the library by Pinterest, to handle thrift communications. So while doing this, I didn't know exactly what thrift, how you could debug thrift calls, and I wanted to sniff the traffic, because when I was using it, I couldn't see anything happen. So I asked John Parisi and James Fish, the maintainers of the Pinterest elixir-thrift library, and they told me there was this tool, thrift tools, that was written in Python by the Pinterest team itself. And so I ended up using that and just adding a note to the README saying, look, if you are looking for a way to debug this, you have thrift tools, it's here, and I think that saves time. It's a small contribution, but again, I wouldn't have had to ask it. John or James wouldn't have had to spend their time on it. And I think it's, again, that sort of Elixir mantra of fostering good documentation. Elixir-thrift contribution done. I now want to take a step back and talk about other ways that you can contribute other than just writing code and opening a pull request in an open source library. Well, some of the times you can actually contribute with writing zero code. And this was one of such cases. The code that I wrote, that I ended up writing for this, ended up actually not being merged in. So I was debugging an issue with a colleague of mine for a good 2 hours of an afternoon. And it was a really dumb mistake. We were passing in a nil as the timeout value for a gen server. But we couldn't really understand it because it was blowing up from Erlang and bringing a very cryptic sort of message. So what ended up causing this was just a typo in the configuration variable name. But what we saw was that this could actually be prevented by gen server in the Elixir module itself. Instead of having an error bubbling up from Erlang that I'm not so used to, I could actually have safeguards, which Elixir is also well known to have in this nice design towards developer happiness. And so I opened a pull request in the Elixir Lang GitHub repo and ended up suggesting this change with code that I had written. This was bluntly rejected by Jose Valim, but it was still a great experience because he ended up seeing value in the change that I was proposing, and he suggested a slightly more, a simple way of doing the same thing, achieving the same result. So he thanked me, and I think that in the end, we both were happy with this change going in. So for another thing that I've done with a colleague of mine, Daniel Caixinha, who's sitting right here, was we did a workshop for Elixir and Phoenix project for college students. What this workshop entailed was a quick run through the language syntax and semantics of what you can do with Elixir. And then you start to build a Phoenix app. You installed Elixir, installed Phoenix, and then leveraging that library that I talked about earlier, Tomato, you could show the restaurants on a map in your current location. In the end, the college students had a fully channel-driven reactive application where they could drag the map and see more restaurants pop up. I think this was a great way of bringing more people into the community. Hopefully we'll have some Elixir sippers coming out of those college students. And I think overall it's just a great way of showing them a new tool. When they think about doing a new project, they might think of Phoenix as a tool in their toolbox instead of just Rails or Django. And I think the functional paradigm made a dent in their thinking. When we were discussing with them, they don't get exposed to that many functional programming at that particular university. And so I think that using it and seeing it live, powering something that's real, show them that functional programming can be more than just academic. Another thing is blog posts. So shameful self-plug here. I blog at danielserrano.dev. And I blogged about playing with FFmpeg C code from Elixir. I'm actually going to be giving a lightning talk after this talk on it, if you guys want to check it out. But it's really a really good way to learn and to share knowledge, writing blog posts. You learn a lot, at least if you're like me, about reading blog posts. And if you think that you learn a lot from reading one, think about how much more you could learn from actually writing one. Because when you write a blog post, it's out there for everyone to see, and you really don't want to screw up. So you end up reading a lot, and again, learning a lot about the subject, so that when you write about it, it's actually accurate, and you're not going to make a fool out of yourself. But even if you do, what I've come to find is that the Elixir community is very nice and engaging, and they will actually take it as an opportunity to learn, for you to learn instead of just bashing on you. So yeah, that's it about other ways of contributing. Now I just wanted to leave with a few notes about the Elixir community and what I think makes it a really good thing to be a part of. I'll start with some ways to get involved. So these are totally not prescriptive, but these are some that have worked for me personally. You can follow them or not, but I think one of the things that's great about it is the people that are involved in the Elixir community, they share their thoughts a lot, and I use Twitter a lot for grabbing those thoughts and sort of making them my own or evolving the ideas I have on something. So following people that are influential in the Elixir community on Twitter is one thing that I think works very well. Also watching Elixir Forum, I think that the hot topic right now is all the live view examples, but you have some interesting discussions, like I remember a very heated one being the private modules, and it's a great way just to check what's happening and feel the vibe of where the language is going, what frameworks are coming along and whatnot. Also signing up for newsletters. I follow the Plataforma Tech one. There are some others out there, and they're great. Reading and writing blog posts. Some of that reading comes from the newsletters themselves, and it's a great way to keep up. Last but not least, present at your local meetups. Another plug here, we have the Lisbon Elixir meetup being organized in Lisbon, and it's been going well for a while now, for some months, and we have a steady cadence of 2 talks per month, more or less. So if you're ever in Lisbon, let us know. Yeah, we can definitely have you present Or if you're not in Lisbon, there are plenty of meetups, so try and see if your local development scene has one as well. I just wanted to leave with a final shout out to the podcast community. The ecosystem around this is great. I enjoy listening to Elixir Outlaws, Elixir Mix, and Elixir Talk. And I've been recently drawn into smart software and smart logic. It has as the host Eric Ostrich, the guy from X Adventure. And this first season is all focused on Elixir in production. And you really hear stories of like Elixir from the trenches. And it's really cool to be aware of what's happening in the industry and how Elixir is being used to power real production systems. The sort of last honorable mention is to Elixir Fountain. I hear Johnny Wynn might be back. I don't know if in the podcast form, but I've heard some stuff. So keep your eyes and ears open. I come from the Ruby community, as I said in the beginning. And in Ruby, we have a saying, we have an acronym for this called -1, which stands for Mats is nice, and so we are nice. Mats being Yukihiro Matsumoto, the creator of Ruby. I think that in Elixir, we have some sort of that. Call it -1. Jose is nice, and so we are nice. I just signed up for the Elixir Lang core mailing list, maybe like 2 months ago, and I keep reading a lot of the discussions going on there. And a few days ago, Jose was explaining someone how they can add global git ignores to their configuration. And you could think that Elixir Lang is no way, the Elixir Lang core mailing list is not the place to discuss that sort of thing, but he actually does what I said earlier. So he takes the time to actually make it an opportunity for people to learn instead of, not being nice. So I think that him coming from the Ruby community and the Ruby world is no coincidence. I think he helped shape that community and is doing it now in a great way. So let's do our part, also contribute more, be available, be engaged, and, keep being nice. So that's me. Any questions?
Thank you. Some really good food for thought questions.
Hey, thank you for the presentation. So you mentioned some tips for creating good pull requests. I was wondering, do you have any tips for, as a maintainer of a library, making things easy for contributors to come in, if you have some tips on that?
Yeah, this is totally not rehearsed, even though it might seem like it. So I'm not a maintainer myself. I mean, other than Tomato, even someone forked it, but they didn't even open a pull request, so I'm no maintainer and I don't know. But what I can tell you is from my experience of, for instance, contributing to the Elixir Lang core with that pull request, I actually had to test stuff to make sure that what I was suggesting wasn't totally preposterous and that it wasn't breaking all the builds. So the documentation in the Elixir core GitHub repo was super thorough, and I could get the tests running in a heartbeat. And so I think that betting on documentation is really important. Also, being present, I think that I don't see any discussion being brought up in Elixir Lang core mailing list and Jose not being there after 24 hours, I think. So being present and having really good docs, I think, is one way. And then just overall, again, being just a nice guy, I guess.
Thank you for your talk. I really liked when you talked about this course you gave to college students. My question would be, did you publish this application anywhere if someone feels like, oh, I want to give the same course, but I don't feel like putting work into creating one?
Yeah. So, me and Daniel, my colleague, we did this workshop and we have it up on GitHub, but we're actually going to be giving the same talk at the Lisbon Elixir meetup. I think that after that, we're going to publish it on the Lisbon Elixir GitHub repo as well, right? So yeah, it's going to be available, and if you guys want to use it, you can use it. It's pretty cool. It doesn't have live view yet, but yeah, we might do it. Not swearing that we will, but we might do it. looks fun.
Hi. I'm not sure if I missed it, but you listed so many sources to get more into Elixir, but aren't there also screencast resources? Do you know any
Oh yeah.
cool
So
screencasts?
regarding
Because-
screencast resources, yeah, I don't know any by heart. Like I know there are some. I think is it Elixir Drip maybe. I think there are some screencasts, but we definitely. So I have to do another shameless plug here. But my team lead João, who was in the photo, is not here today. But he did a series of webcasts for Pact. It's 2 series. The first one is more basic Elixir stuff, and the second one more advanced OTP features that you can use from Elixir. So yeah, I think I'd recommend those definitely. Not biased at all.
Okay, let's hear it for Daniel. Thank you.